Hey, hello everyone. So now let's start simulating our t-shirt. So first of all, we will create an object merge. In this node, we're gonna bring the animated John Wick. So let's take the null and let's drag and drop here. And let's call this node John Wick call. Okay. So in order to prepare our shirt for Vellum, we need to do some stuff. First of all, we are going to create a remesh, because Vellum, the cloth, works better if our mesh, the subdivision of our mesh, are triangles. So if we connect this here and we decrease this value to 0.09, we will see that we achieved this, and now our mesh is made with triangles. We don't need to reduce this value a lot, because the more you decrease, the slower is going to be the calculations. But the more you decrease, more detail is going to have your simulations. But let's find something in between. Okay? So here we have our mesh, our remesh. Then we will create the group, and this group is gonna be made for the constraints. So we are gonna create this group node, and these points are gonna be the places where the cloth is gonna be attached to our John Wick collider. So let's create the node group, and let's plug it here. So remember, let's put something like shirt cons. Okay. Oh yeah, shirt cons. And here let's put the $OS. Okay. So now this is gonna take the name of our group. And let's change the group type to points, because it works better with points. And there are a lot of ways to create the constraints. You can paint them, you can select by hand, you can create bounding boxes and select the groups by bounding boxes, by objects, by different geometries. But I will explain you the fastest way, which is selecting by hand, if you know that you are not going to do any changes in that geometry. So let's put it here. Let's activate the gizmo, and let's click this arrow, and let's select the parts we want, like the points we want. So we want this part. Let's select something like this. Okay, we have the bottom part, we have a little bit of the arms and the shoulders. Okay. So once with this, what we are gonna do is, a recommendation is to create a normal node, just to compute the normals again if some of them were broken. Okay? And for the cloth, this is ready. So we can create a null, and we can put out shirt to Vellum. Okay? And now let's work with the collider, because now we have the John here. But we have the eyes, the eyebrows, the beard, the hair, and we don't need that. So we can make things faster for the Vellum. So we can come here and select by hand. Something like that. Maybe we can select I prefer to select by primitives. This part, and of course, to go faster, we can select by here. Remember the lasso picking. So cool. Let's hit delete, and in the blast, let's delete non-selected. And now we change our John Wick for Bruce Willis. Okay, what we are gonna do now is delete the hands, because the cloth is not gonna collide with the hand, and at the same time, if the hand collides with the cloth, it's gonna create troubles because the hand is gonna break the constraints and we will have issues in the simulation. So let's delete that. Something like this. Okay, so once with this, we're gonna create a poly cap just to fill these empty areas. And finally, we're gonna create a normal. Great. So we are ready to start simulating the volume. So we can create a null. We can put John Wick call to Velum. So I'm gonna explain you the setup of Velum, and then we are getting sight of each node. So the first thing we have to create is a Velum constraints. In this case, we are gonna create a Velum cloth. So this is a Velum constraints, but it comes already with the constraint type, which is cloth. Okay, so in this node, we are gonna create and tell Houdini all the properties that we need to achieve the correct material for cloth. So if we are doing a silk material, here is where we are gonna tell Houdini that this is a silk, and we are gonna put the parameters of silk. One moment, because in this part we have some extra geo. It's okay. So the first input, it's for the geometry we want to simulate. In this case, we want to simulate our t-shirt. The third input is for the constraints. Now we don't have to apply it now, but remember that this is gonna be the same in this section. So it's gonna transfer in the same way. And the third input is for the colliders, okay? Of course, we can create a merge and we can put more colliders. So once with this node, then in a moment I'm gonna explain what we have to play here. We need to create the constraints. So let's create a Velum constraints. And in this node, we are gonna tell Houdini that the constraint type is attached to geometry. And here we're gonna tell where Houdini has to pick the constraints. And finally, we're gonna create a Velum solver. This node is gonna create all the calculations and it's gonna do the magic, and all the magic is gonna happen here. Okay? So let's start with the first one. The first one, we need to create silk. So the two sections we have to focus are the stretch one and the bend one. So in the stretch one, we need to increase the compression stiffness a lot because silk need this value, increase it a lot. So let's put like something like 8,000. And in the bend, this is gonna create the shapes of the silk. So we need to take the stiffness and reduce it a lot in order to have a lot of wrinkles. So let's put 0.0001. And one super important parameter is the damping ratio. This one and this one. So it's very common in Houdini when you are doing cloth that your geo, once it's simulated, it's with a kind of jittering point or jittering movement, and it's like a problem of the solver. So you don't want that. So the best way to solve this problem is by increasing the dampings a little bit. So this first one, let's put it at 0.01. And the second one, let's put it at 0.1. We want to increase that value. But as I told you, this needs a little bit of tweaking, and I recommend you to do not touch a lot of parameters, because if you touch a lot of parameters and then you press simulation and it's not working, you don't know what it's not following the good path. So these are the values that you are gonna have to touch for sure. But then you can play a little bit with the storage stiffness, just a little bit. Then you can maybe decrease a little bit the compression, or even increase it. So these are the parameters that we have to touch here mainly. In the balloon constraints, this node it's very easy. We're gonna select the group type into points, because remember that we create the shear cons in points. So in this node, we have changed the geometry to points, and here we will pick the shear cons. And the target geometry is for example, if now it's working with the closest point. So as you can see here, each ball is a constraint. And this constraint is gonna pick the shortest, can you see these white lines? The shortest path to the collider. So for us, it's gonna work perfectly, okay? So let's leave this in blank and put it in primitives. And here we will be able to touch the strength of the constraints. I'm gonna show you another way to animate this parameter, but yeah, here we can play with this value. And finally, let's focus on the solver. The solver is very easy. It's not like the Pyro solver, which is something crazy. Here, we have the start frame. So if your frame range is different, just change this number. Maybe your simulation starts at the 1001, so you have to change this value to 1001. Then what we have to touch is the substeps. I usually like to start with five substeps in the cloth, but I recommend you to start from at least 2, and then let's increase to achieve like something that your machine is not getting crazy and very slow. And finally, we're going to touch the constraints iterations. This value is very important for 2 things. The first one is to reduce a little bit more this jittering effect in our cloth. And the second one is to avoid the chewing gum effect. I know that maybe you have seen some simulations where the cloth looks like super stiffness and stretchy. So by increasing this number, you will avoid these two problems. So let's start with something like 300. Okay? And in the forces, remember that here we have our gravity, which is something that I usually don't like to touch, because we are working with something like realistic, because if each block is 1 meter, 2 blocks are 2 meters. So in theory, the real gravity is minus 9.8 in the real life. So it's something that you shouldn't touch if you are working in the correct scale. And finally, this node, I like to put it at almost 0, just to assure that nobody will create a wind field and it's going to destroy our simulation, because this only works if someone creates a wind field. And that's all. So once with this, let's click play and let's see what we have. Remember, by pressing Ctrl and up arrow, you will go to the first frame. By pressing just the up arrow, you will start your simulation. And by pressing Ctrl and left and right arrow, you will go to the different keyframes if you have done.